Ladies and gentlemen, independent Americans around the country and around the world, this is a moment I have been waiting 200 episodes for. One of my favorite voices in America, one of my favorite people to talk to, one of my favorite humans, a person that is very dear to me and I think dear to America, especially in times like this. I am so happy, thrilled, humbled to welcome back to the program the great and powerful Dr. Rachel Maddow.
The great and powerful makes me sound like I'm very, very tiny and I'm behind a very elaborate curtain. And when you pull the curtain back, the great and powerful Maddow is actually very small and on my TV screen.
So not small. So not that.
Hi, Paul. How are you, man?
I am so happy to talk to you. And it just makes me happy. I think part of what I love talking to you about in an environment like this is like, you're cool and you bring joy to people. And I think people may not see that all the time on television. I know they feel it, but you have a lot of joy and you have an energy that's contagious. And I get happy being around you. And I know other people get happy about being around you. And my wife is like happy that I'm talking to you today. Everybody is happy I'm talking to you today. Everybody listening is happy. So I want you to know that you bring happiness to the world.
That makes me happy to hear it. I was just thinking about the fact that you and I have a lot of history and you and I have been through a lot of things, but do you realize we're going on 20 years knowing each other and being friends?
Yes. I was thinking about it too. Before this, I was thinking about Air America and just like walking into that fucked up weird place with like wires hanging out of the walls and Chuck D and you and like, we're not young anymore.
No, although we're all still us. You know what I mean? Like nobody has gone through one of those like radical transformations where you're like, who is this? I don't recognize this person's values. They've done a 180. They're an apostate. They're all these, like, I feel like there's a bunch of people who were around at that time who were kind of in our milieu have gotten really weird or who've gone like really radically different, no, I won't name names, but you know exactly who I'm talking about. But I feel like you and I, and Chuck D actually, mentioning him from Air America, like we've all kind of stayed who we are. Things have changed, but I would recognize you 20 years ago if I saw you now.
I think that's true. I think that and you're doing so many cool things now. I wonder if anyone's going to do. I mean, I feel like it's almost like a Mark Maron series, but like do a show about Air America. I don't know if it's going to be a sitcom or a documentary or what, but like if anybody's got footage from back then, or they could write maybe you can write a script about it with, I don't know, Steven Spielberg or someone, but it was interesting times, just that environment and who was there and who came through and everybody from Franken to Maron to Chuck to you and all the directions people have gone in was interesting.
It was an interesting group, and it was in business terms, it was bizarro land. We now know down the road what was going on there in business terms, and it is a horror movie. But in terms of us being on the air and trying to do a media thing, I remember, when we launched, it was like, I won't get this exactly right, but I think it was the week of Abu Ghraib. Like, I think the first week we were on the air was the Abu Ghraib revelations. And it was obviously the year that W was up for re-election, and it was the RNC was in New York City, which was pretty ballsy after what had happened on 9/11 and Giuliani and all that stuff. And it was the maelstrom, and there was so much media attention on us that we were going to be the thing that changed the whole media environment. And it didn't matter that there was talk radio and Rush Limbaugh and Glenn Beck on the radio at that point, and Fox News instead with Al Franken and Janine Garofalo on the radio. America was going to take up 180 in its politics, and so many of the assumptions were wrong. But what we were trying to do, and to a certain extent, what we did, I think, is interesting in its own terms.
And it was radio, like good radio, right? And sometimes it was really fucking bad radio, but it was radio. And I think like you have these great roots in radio. And I feel like what I'm trying to do is a lot like a next generation of radio. And I always loved doing radio more than anything else. I think when I was there, it must have been May 2004. So we've known each other through all of that and all these iterations. And I want to get to all the things you're doing. And I will tell you as often as I can how proud of you I am as a friend, but also how grateful I am for your wisdom and your voice. And I don't know, I always, someone said to me, what do you want to do, for a job. It's like, I'd like to be a public intellectual. And like, I feel like that's what you have become. But let me ask you the question I ask of everyone. Where are you, Rachel, and how are you?
I am in Massachusetts, not in New York City, which is a big part of what has changed in my life since the pandemic, and that's been a good change. And that is a big part of how I am too, because I think that I have learned to embrace my introversion. That I am not a misanthrope. It's not that I don't like people, but I am happiest alone. And I am happiest in particular working on my own. I like to collaborate with people. I need to collaborate with people. All the work that I do requires assistance, and requires collaboration, and requires people smarter than me working with me. But when it comes down to reading and thinking and coming up with what I want to say about what's going on in the world, I like to be on my own. And when the pandemic changed everything work-wise, I left New York and moved to Massachusetts. And I'm occasionally still back in New York. I still do it, but this is better for me, and it has matured me and made me be more real about who I am. And spending a lot of time kibitzing with other people, particularly in the workday, is enervating to me. It drains me and doesn't feel good. And I don't do that anymore. And it means that I think, working in kind of a more potent way, if that makes sense. So I'm good. And I get to spend more time with Susan, and I get to spend more time outdoors, and I get to spend more time on my own. And I like living in rural New England, chopping wood and taking hikes.
I mean, I can feel that evolution, and I've dabbled in it myself in the last couple of years, and I know, what that can do for me, and especially the nature, which I think is something that was so invigorating to me, and the drain of the socializing and the drain of the machine that we were all on. But I can't move off of this. You're in New England. There is big news in the world. Tom Brady is retiring. And I can't. Yeah, I'm not going to let you
lost the connection there.
Part of what I love is, like, I want you to talk about shit that nobody else hears you talk about, and you talking about football. Like, I don't know how many years it was ago, you were on a show wearing an Eli Manning jersey because you lost a bet. Tom Brady beat everybody except the Giants. But like, really, I mean, I'm curious. Like, what do you think about the retirement of Tom Brady, Rachel Maddow?
I just want to talk about the fact that bet has been paying off for you for more than a decade now. Every year, the anniversary of me wearing that shirt on TV mysteriously pops up on my phone. It's like,
I didn't do it this year. Facebook reminds me every year, but I didn't even send it to you this year.
The bet was not, you will wear a Giants jersey on TV, and then for the rest of your natural life, I will lord it over you, as if Eli Manning is still the Giants quarterback. But it's all right. It's all right. I'll someday pay you back. It's fine. Listen, the Patriots, it turns out, needed Tom Brady in order to win. It turns out Bill Belichick wasn't the secret sauce on his own. That, to me, is somewhat comforting, because I feel like there was a lot of myth making around people's individual skills, and it turns out you needed the collaboration. I will say, Tom Brady going to Tampa, and like, remember when he got busted like for going to a closed playground? He was like working out in a Florida playground when all the playgrounds were closed, and he was like, I'm Tom Brady. And I was like, oh, Tom, you've become Florida man. So yeah, I mean, I wish him all the best. I'm sorry about his personal life. It was a little overdue. Had he made his point after his one Super Bowl and not embarrassed himself thereafter, probably everybody would have been better off. But it's not like don't cry for me, Argentina,
Can I ask you, I mean, the NFL is always kind of a part of the culture. But I think even more so now with Damar Hamlin getting hurt. I mean, the popularity is still very high. What are your thoughts on the NFL and the intersection with America, as someone who studies America and its violent tendencies and its political drama? And so what do you think of the NFL? And I got to ask your prediction. I mean, with the dreaded Eagles going up against the Chiefs, I don't know if any other show is going to get Rachel Maddow's prediction on the Super Bowl, but
yeah,
Maddow on the NFL.
Yeah, I mean, I watch both pro football and college football. I am not an expert by any means. I'm actually not even I'm not as much of a fan as I used to be. Like I'm not watching with a rooting interest the way that I used to be. I think in part because you kind of lose your anybody who you invest in, you end up kind of losing your idols, right? Like nobody ever ends up being worth the adoration that we give them as fans. But I definitely still enjoy the sport, and increasingly, like in a crescendo that increases every single day, I feel guilty about it because we are being entertained by these men who are compensated for what they do and who love what they do, injuring themselves for our pleasure. And I'm not going to lie and say that I don't watch. I do, but I feel terrible about it. I mean, we've talked about this a little bit in terms of thinking about your boys and football and how important football was to you, not as a fan, but as a player. And I do sort of feel like it's something that in the not too distant future, we're going to look back and be like, wow, that was a barbaric thing that we enjoyed as a country. You know, remember that scene? Did you watch Mad Men?
Yeah.
There was one scene, I think kind of early on in Mad Men, where Don and his wife and their kids are out having a picnic, like on a gentle, like rolling slope, like in the grass. And they're having this picnic, and like the normal, like Mad Men character development thing happens during the scene of the picnic. And then when they're done, the wife picks up the picnic blanket on which they've just had the blanket and just shakes it, and all the trash goes onto the hill. And then she folds up the blanket, gets back in the car. And it's like, it's not even the point of the scene, but it's like this horror moment, like, oh my God, that's all your trash in this pristine place. I feel like that's, by the time you and I are dead, that will be how most Americans think about our habit now in 2023 of watching football.
That's fascinating.
What do you think? Do you disagree?
You know, the parallel I've been drawing, and I wrote a piece for CNN about it a bit, is there's a really unique devolution in America where football has become a unique part of a subset of our culture, very much in the same way the military has. So it's like, if you're around football, it's because of a certain couple of things, right? Like most likely because someone in your family played, right? Or you're in a community that focuses on it, or you view it as a place that provides you with options, or you have a sense of adventure, the closest you can come to combat without, you know, fighting, right? And there's, I think, a very underestimated component. I think it's the ultimate team game in American sports, right? There is this need to work together with 11 other people on the field at the same time. So all of that gets baked into it. And I think it's the danger of it that, you know, and you still take on, and you have a discussion with yourself and your family. It is a lot like a conversation I've been having with myself and a lot of parents about the military. I mean, they're very different in many ways, but it's kind of like either you get it or you don't. And if you don't, you need someone to take you through it. Like, I can't, if people never played football, never been around football, they won't understand how it changed my life and how maybe it saved my life. And yeah, maybe I got a head injury, but maybe I didn't end up in jail, right? And there is a cultural component of it again, the military is kind of a spectator sport now too. We all stand on the sidelines and cheer for them when they come back, but we're not on that field, and they're not taking the head injuries. So it's been really a fascinating.
Is the risk of injury then implicit to the value of it? Like, is it not? Do you the team factor that you're talking about there? Yeah. Injury isn't inherent in that. You're actually less able to do your role in the team if you're hurt, right? You get taken out. Yeah. But you're saying that the risk, sort of that's one of the important.
It's one of the pillars. It's like jumping off a cliff. It's like, you know, it's skydiving. It's like, hey, I know this is dangerous, but for me, it's worth it, right? And if you haven't gone through that calculation yourself, it's hard for people to say, you know, how could you ever let your son do that, or how could you ever do that yourself? And everybody makes their own choice, right? And you have to figure. I mean, tennis is dangerous. I mean, there are other things are dangerous. It's just a level of danger that you're willing to entertain. Driving fast is a danger. I mean, there's a lot of, and I don't mean to make to dismiss it, but I do think it cuts to this really unique part of American culture. Because football is so uniquely American, and it's so big, and it's so fantastic, and it's so profitable. It's a reflection of our times. I think when you say, hey, you know, we're shaking that blanket out, I think it's also a time capsule in this moment in America.
Yeah. I mean, or it's infinite, or we're going to keep doing this for another 100 years. And right. I mean, the what's interesting to me though, I mean, what you were just talking there about the value of it and being around it and it being a source of value to so many people who participate in it, that I think is really interesting in terms of thinking about whether or not you want to do it or you want your kids to do it. But there's a different moral calculus for those of us who aren't playing, who are just watching, who are just part of the ad demographic that makes it a multi-billion-dollar industry. Like, I'm not contributing in any way to the positive things that are coming out of it, other than making it possible for people to get salaries.
Kind of like most Americans in politics.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Like paying taxes, watching MSNBC once in a while, and maybe I vote, but I, bitch about it all the time. I'm really passionate about how I feel about Joe Biden, but am I actually involved? I don't know. I mean, I think we could probably do a whole series on this, but I think it's a fascinating discussion, especially in this moment of time where politics and sports are so intertwined in healthy ways, but also in really unhealthy ways. So
yeah.
Media we talked about Air America, we're talking about sports. You're at the forefront of a lot of discussions, but part of what you talked about is how your position has changed and your perspective has changed. What are you doing now that you're not in America's living room, 5 days a week? I'm so happy for you. I'm like, wow, it's just like to not have to go to anything must be liberating, right? Yep. But I know I was reading, and I know that Ultra was just picked up with Steven Spielberg and Tony Kushner, and this is amazing. You're working on these projects, but can you talk about, we're not going to live forever. You're making decisions about how to make the most impact or give you the most value, however you would structure it. But it's coinciding with this next generation of media. The future of media is not cable news.
Right.
It's what you're doing. So can you talk about what you've learned and what you're thinking there in this next chapter of your life? You're kind of like, I don't know if you're Madonna or Lady Gaga. You just keep reinventing yourself. But you're
definitely not Madonna or Lady Gaga.
But you're ahead. But you're clearly ahead of the country and ahead of the media. So what do you see and what are you thinking?
It's interesting though. I didn't make these changes because I see something going on in the business and I'm trying to get ahead of that because I want to be the master of the next iteration of me. Like that wasn't the thinking at all. But I definitely, I hit a constraint in terms of whether or not I could stay on TV 5 days a week for a 15th year and for a 16th year, just because of the way I work. Like I just topped out. And it's my physical health, I think, I've talked to you a lot about my back problems. It started in 2017 and that's pretty core stuff, pun intended. Mm-hmm. And so that, and also I felt like the thing I always come back to is that I want to be proud of myself. I want to be proud of my work, and being on the daily production grind. I just felt like I was getting dumber, like my bandwidth was shrinking. Like I was less able to think complex thoughts because I needed to think short thoughts that I could get on TV by a certain time every day. And that was fine for a really long time. Like I don't have any regrets about anything that I did in all the years that I was 5 days a week. But when MSNBC gave me the opportunity to think, like recognize that box is closing, think about some other way to contribute. We didn't initially come up with what I'm in now. It took a little figuring. Like for a while I was going to stop, I was going to take long breaks and then come back, and it was going to be 4 days a week and sometimes 5 days a week and sometimes often together. And I was going to start and stop and start and stop. That was kind of the original plan. What we settled on is I'll be here Monday nights. I'll do the regular Rachel Maddow show that you have been getting from me for years, but you'll only get it 1 day a week. I will be there for other big news events. State of the Union is coming up. I'll be there for State of the Union, for debates, for primaries, for all the January 6th hearings and stuff. But other than that, I'm going to work on projects that take a longer horizon. And so the Ultra podcast was a year's worth of work, and it wasn't less work at all actually than being on the air 5 days a week. I was working 7 days a week on that. Like Susan didn't see me for months at a time while I was working on Ultra. It was really hard. It wasn't that I don't want to do less work. I just wanted to do less of the exact same kind of work every day. So it's not that hard work is a problem. It's the grind of grinding yourself out through one gear that you're in all the time. So that's what I'm doing. I mean, I'm working on podcasts. I'm writing a book. I've got a TV show a scripted TV show that I'm developing. That's actually just gone through a really big milestone, and we're like writing the pilot, and that's great. And Bagman's going to be a movie, and Ultra's going to be a movie, and I got a bunch of other stuff. There's some documentary stuff I'm interested in. There's a couple of books that I want to adapt in one way or another. I've got some weird ideas about maybe doing that in kind of podcast style, serialized audio from books. And I've got a million ideas, and I'm working on 12 things at once, plus a weekly TV show now. And that is a better life for me. Yeah.
And it's awesome for everyone who enjoys what you do. I mean, what you're producing, I would argue, is higher quality, more impactful. Like when Ultra's, I loved Ultra. I was sending you texts about it. I mean, when it's in your ear and it's immersive and it's hot, super high quality, right? It was really super high quality, and you were captured. It wasn't MSNBC background noise while people are on the Peloton or whatever it is, right? Like it was immersive, and your books are like that. And I mean, if MSNBC and your partners are smart, they'd say, hey, here's everything you need, do whatever you want, and just keep kicking out stuff, because it's a thought leadership production studio that you've created, right? And you're going to reach more people, I would think, in film and in podcasts and in the books than in cable news. And like, I'm glad for it, because the stuff you're putting out it's hits. I mean, I got to go back to, recording artists. Like you've evolved, and now you're cranking out hits. And I think what I'm so satisfied about it, as a consumer of what you do, is the intersection consistently of national security. Like, and the stuff that you and I have been talking about for 20 years, you've never lost that. And sometimes, especially in the last couple of years, I feel like I'm on a mountaintop saying to everybody, hey, national security is everything, right? And I think the country loses that sometimes, in part because of the lack of connection to the military, distance from things like Ukraine. So there's a thread of that I think is essential to your knowledge and your explanation, especially to audiences that aren't always exposed to that stuff. So it's exciting to watch. And I think it's really contributing tremendously to the country and the country's collective knowledge.
I mean, when you say we're going to, reach more people, I mean, I hope that it's going to reach a lot of people, but I also really like, the idea of just reaching people in different ways too, right? Yeah. Like Ultra, I think the story of Ultra is like, it has value as history. Like there is actually some original historical research there that advances like that in a kind of academic way, but 99.9% of the people listening to it are not listening to it because they want a history lesson. It's because it's a like cracking story.
Yeah.
And that's a great way to reach people. I mean, same thing with Bagman. Like, is there any native interest in the fate of Spiro Agnew? No. However, you're going to fracking love the story of these young prosecutors who bit off way more than they could chew and ended up changing history in a way that we completely forgot about, and that's super important. And it's a rollicking thing. And so in the same way that I've done cable, I've tried to do cable news in kind of a weird way. Like I've tried to always be a little surprising. Like, where is she going with this? Why is she talking about when a meteor hit the earth? I thought this was about the Kansas abortion referendum, right? Like I've always tried to grab people in unexpected and novel ways, and this kind of expands it. That's why I called my company Surprise Inside, which is like, all right, like you never exactly know what you're going to get. Like you're going to open up because you know there's something here, but you don't know what it's going to be till you get there. Like I mean, you and I have been talking about this as a narrative strength and bringing people something of value that whole time.
You're such a fantastic and passionate student of history. And then I think you're at your best when you're teaching. Like hey, look at this thing I found. Let me show you what it's all about and my excitement and why I'm so excited and how it connects with everything else and why you should care, why you should tell your friends, right? And by the way, here's what else might be coming down the pipe, because I've tried, at least in my show, especially to talk about not just what's happening, but what's happening next. Yep. Especially for those of us that have been close to it in experience and in study and in practice. Tony Romo's been getting beaten up a lot, but I say, we have an opportunity to be kind of a Tony Romo of politics, to say, hey, we understand politics, we understand the culture. Here's what might be coming next, and you're better at that than anybody. And I think there's an Oscar.
The only way to tell what's coming is to know what's happened before, right? Like, has this experiment been tried before? Yes, it has. Here's what happened the last time we tried it. Like, that's the only, I mean, that's what Tony Romo brings to the analysis. I mean, he brings a lot that we don't like as well, but he drives me crazy.
And look, there's going to be so many chapters in your story, and seeing you on stage getting an Oscar with Steven Spielberg and Tony Kushner is totally within the realm of this. And one day, you know, I've said this to you, I think you're one of the more important leaders of our time. Someone will play you in a movie and there will be your story. But in the meantime, you're taking us through all of this. And I got to get you on Ukraine. I mean, because you're not covering it every day. We've been diving into it hard on this show, talking to a lot of people who are there. I mean, maybe I'll just ask you, what do you think is most important right now? And what maybe are folks missing?
I mean, I don't want to put myself forward as an expert on this. And so, you know, take this with a grain of salt in terms of me as basically a lay news consumer on this issue. I don't have any expertise on it. But it seems to me, particularly looking at history that may inform some of this, that the important thing here is not that Ukraine is saved from losing. The important thing here is that Russia loses. Because this was not Ukraine's idea. This was not a meeting of two clashing forces. This was not, you know, Ukraine provoking Russia when they knew they ought not to, but blah, blah, blah. You know, like the Russian mindset, like people who were like, oh, we need to facilitate peace talks here. Really? I don't know, because it kind of seems like Ukraine was minding its own business and Russia came in and stomped into their house and started setting things on fire. So there's not like a negotiation between the homeowner and the home invader at that point. So the outcome has to be specific to Russia. And we need to do our best to save and to save the Ukrainian people to the extent that they can be saved and protected, and to help the Ukrainian government and military stand up what they need to do to take care of their own people. But Russia needs to lose, because otherwise the lesson of this is that Putin can keep doing this. It's not like this is his first invasion, and it won't be his last. And so that is, I think, the core level at which America needs to approach this. And that means not, you know, arming Ukraine to make sure the war doesn't end with Russia winning. Like, you can't give them enough support so that they don't lose. You have to give them enough support so that Russia loses.
This is where I love talking to you, because this is the Rachel Maddow that I know. And I feel like if America said liberal Rachel Maddow on MSNBC, right, they would not have anticipated that response. And I think, just to put a pin on it, the left in this country is missing that, is missing you, and missing you specifically. If you had been on every night, which I'm not requesting or wishing, I think it would have had a dramatic difference on how the left in particular views that discussion. Like, I've been talking about how, yes, we've spent a lot of money, but it's been roughly 5% of our defense budget, and we've taken out 50% of their military capacity. Like, we're taking out half of one, if not our most prominent enemy, right? And the calculations around defeating Russia and saying it in those terms is really important. And I'm so thankful that you shared that, because I feel like the shortcoming on the left isn't a softness about Russia, though. I think the shortcoming on the left is focusing on this at all, about whether or not this is important and whether or not this is something that Americans ought to be engaged in, rather than this being treated as something that's a specialized policy matter that we don't engage in. I mean, I feel like the left is not being so much dumb about it as the left is being absent from the discussion. Yeah. But I think mainstream Democrats who are engaged on this are generally right on this. Like, I don't know if you've talked to Senator Chris Murphy or heard him talk about it, or Congressman Jim Himes, also from Connecticut, about it. Like, they're doggone, like, I think that they've exhibited good leadership on this kind of stuff, and they're sort of emblematic of where the Democratic Party is on it. So I don't feel like the left is blowing it so much as just not focusing on it. But no, I think you're right, except I would also define the left as not just the moderates and the Democrats. There's the everything else. And I think a lot of it is, frankly, like the MSNBC audience. I don't think they're as well versed when you're not there on national security issues. I mean, I'm still one of the only guys or gals who's been in the service that has a show of any kind, right? Like there aren't too many. You got Pete Hegseth, right? And you got Tulsi doing her thing, but there aren't too many national security people that are anchoring shows, that are driving that perspective, that are reporting, and guiding the national conversation. I mean, I'm looking forward to the day we've got, a post 9/11 vet in the White House, but even on the evening news, to guide that discussion and that perspective, I think is missing. And that's something you and I have talked about a lot, just the cultural competence that's lacking in the media, but also has been on a generation on the left that now is changing with the newer generation. But there's this bulk in the middle that was after Vietnam and before 9/11 that just doesn't have the understanding. Yeah. And you were a bridge on that. So
I do think that the reason that it's not developing, though, is because it's not seen as central to the news. Like people sometimes say to me,
and that's the part that I'm like, stop there. We can't go any further, right?
It's not necessarily how, like, people ask me sometimes about like my process in terms of developing what's going to be on the show and who we're going to book and what we're going to talk about. And I always tell people, and I feel like it never really sinks in, but like the hard part is not figuring out what's important about X story and what to tell the viewers about it and what person to book and what conversation to have in the interview. The hard part, and therefore the valuable part, the interesting part, is deciding that it's a story at all. Deciding that it ought to be on the news, deciding that it is worthy of discussion, new, interesting, compelling, something that has an impact on the world and ethics and our relationship with the afterlife. You know what I mean? Whatever it is that makes you think something has value. And national security waxes and wanes in terms of whether or not we see it as, the equivalent of farm policy, right? Or, some other sort of mostly technocratic thing, or whether we see it as something about which we have a national debate. I mean, that's what my first book was about, right? Like, do we even see decisions about the military as things about which we make political decisions? The drift in American policy has been so that we don't. It just happens on its own, on autopilot, and we never discuss it. That's the important thing, I think.
So the drift is happening all over politics. I know you're reluctant to make predictions, but as we think about Ultra and we think about this moment and we think about what's next, it's my view that it's Biden and Trump unless one of them gets sick, dies, or gets arrested. That's at least where my money is if I have to bet. And if
those three things seem very likely, right? Sickness, death, and arrest. They all seem like very much on the table.
Yeah. And to include Biden, like, he's not young. If his health takes a tumble, this whole thing goes sideways, and then there's a total disruption that maybe the country isn't ready for, and maybe each party isn't ready for. But I guess I want to try to figure out how to make this most important. What do you see as the most important part of that? Trump ain't dead, in my view. And I think there's been an overestimation of his demise. And I feel like as a national security matter, he is still in my view, a threat. And in my view, a threat to this country in so many ways. And I've started to call it the American insurgency. After January 6th, I think it went to ground. I think it still exists. I think it's the #1 national security priority. So I connect the two in a way that I don't think most people do. But what is your prediction for how this is going to shake out in the next couple of months and even years?
I mean, I'm a bad predictor. I mean, I really thought we were going to have President McCain in 2008, so which I think you remember at the time. I'm glad we didn't make a bet about that. I'm terrible at making predictions, but I share your view on Trump. I think that his demise has been oversold, and it's true that I saw this morning in the news, I saw this week in the news that his fundraising out of the gate after he made his presidential announcement wasn't that strong, but it wasn't nothing. And the fact remains that at this point in the cycle in 2016, there were lots of Republicans who had declared and were running. At this point, it's only him. And the reason it's only him is because people don't want to run against him. I mean, that's real. That matters. I also think the idea that there's going to be a Democrat running who's not Joe Biden, again, in the absence of something dramatic happening, I think it's going to be Joe Biden. I think that we can argue this, and I'm sure lots of people will take issue with me saying this, but I think that he has performed very well as a president in his first term in terms of what he's been able to deliver, substantive legislation and policy that makes a difference for people. So, I think on the basis of that alone, he's likely to be the the nominee if he runs, and again, barring anything weird. So I don't know. My sense on Ron DeSantis on the Republican side, who gets all the air that's not devoted to Trump, is, again, I will be proven wrong about this, I'm sure, but he feels a little bit like 2023's Bobby Jindal. Remember when Bobby Jindal was going to be or like 2015's Marco Rubio. Remember when Marco Rubio was going to run the table? And it's like, there is something to be said for DeSantis being just a personal disappointment. Like, you hear about him in a way that makes him seem like he's gonna like have this incredible gravitas, and then when he like walks up to the microphone and starts talking, like it's kind of a Jared Kushner thing. Remember Jared Kushner's first press conference at the White House? He's like this power behind the throne, and he's a White House advisor, and who is this guy, and who are these ties, and this crazy stuff with his family, and Chris Christie and his dad going to prison, and who is this Jared Kushner? And he walks up to the microphone for his first press conference, and he goes, "Hello, my name is Jared Kushner." And you're like, oh God.
And everybody said, that's what he sounds like? That's what he sounds like?
I still have that same reaction to Ron DeSantis. He gets like, he swells up to the microphone in his big, weird, fitting, like his mascot suit. And then he opens his mouth and you're like, oh, state legislature from the 1980s. Wow. Okay. Like, he just doesn't, I don't know, but
I think that's true. And I think, but if he was smart, he would wait till Trump dies, or till Trump is out of the picture, because if you take on Trump now, you pay a price, right? And I think everybody is going to find that out now. And so if I were strategizing on his behalf, I'd say wait till Trump is out, dead, or in jail. That might take a couple of years, but then you're the heir apparent. Now he's not that smart. And so he might try it, right? And that's the
he has no charisma at all. He has no personal attraction. I mean, he's the like the little magnet with the iron filings. Yeah. Like, he's like, turn the magnet around, like. Phew.
But I also think it's possible that Trump could get the nomination, Trump could not get the nomination, and then run anyway. Like, I mean, this is where I think we're talking about independence a lot, and I've been diving into this movement. I think it's full of potential for good and for evil. Right? Like, the independent energy is there. And we've had Andrew Yang and Chrissy Ty Whitman and Kinzinger and so many others. And I do think, Tulsi Gabbard is now playing with this fire. She wants to be, she's playing with it. And she's got, a growing media base. And she may try to run as an independent. It may be a small thing. But I look at them as
I can't believe you're talking about Tulsi Gabbard as a real thing. I have to,
because
she was a real thing, and then she turned into Lyndon LaRouche, dude. I mean,
but I view them differently. I don't view them as they have to win the Super Bowl or nothing. I view them as armies. Like, they can still cause damage without winning, right? And if Trump only has a couple million people, he can fuck up our whole government. He can fuck up our whole country. He can undermine our national security. So I view it that way. It's not just whether or not he becomes president or not. Yeah. And so that's why I track all these pieces on the chessboard.
I think it's right. And I raised the concept of Lyndon LaRouche advisedly. I mean, that had electoral impact. It's not like Lyndon LaRouche was ever going to get elected to anything, but that movement, that cult destructive movement, had an impact in other races, and in terms of the way electoral politics has been constructed, and in terms of chasing normal people out of politics by making it actually a scary place to be, and a dangerous place to be in a very base level sense. And in the same way that, listen, when George Wallace ran in '68, right, the importance of that has always been measured in terms of what that cost the Republican Party, in terms of what that cost the Democrats and the Republicans, and when the two parties were realigning around the South, when he locked up all of those states. But for me, the fascinating thing about George Wallace is what his campaign became. The '68 George Wallace campaign evolved into some of the most violent ultra-right fascist revolutionary radicalism we've ever had in this country. And it's sort of a history that's never been told in mainstream ways, is one of the things I'm working on right now. But you're right, it has these insurgent, it's particularly violent movements, when they are adjacent to electoral politics, they don't necessarily produce electoral wins, but they can produce a lot of electoral losses for people outside those movements, and they can sort of metastasize into violent movements and otherwise destructive things that do change our politics. It's real, and I think the prospect of Trump somehow not surviving the Republican process and running outside the system, there's no chance in which that puts him back in the White House, but it could blow up the two-party system in a way that's unpredictable.
To that point, it's Independent Americans. We've been exploring this question that I have now called a movement, and I think it is a movement. You're a student of movement politics. You're a student of history in America. You know, I've lived and studied and led in the veterans movement for 15 years. Now I've jumped into this new movement that I view it as a movement. I see a lot of small timers and old timers and a lot of clashing, but a lot of opportunity. How do you view it in this moment in time where Kyrsten Sinema is now probably going to be an independent? Manchin's playing with this. You know, you've got Andrew Yang starting the Forward Party. How do you evaluate the opportunity or the strength of this movement and/or movements to disrupt the two-party duopoly?
We're definitely gonna disagree on this, which is out of love and out of mutual respect. We can have this fight. I think in almost all of the cases that you've described, almost all of the people you've name-checked, the flirting with or embracing of the independent label and the abandonment of whatever previous party, in almost every case, not everyone, but almost everyone, is the product of delusions of grandeur. Is that people are used to being told you're amazing and you're singularly important, and this isn't a football game, this is a tennis match, and you're Roger Federer and nobody can beat you. And the people in power get treated that way and start to believe that about themselves. And, you know, you see, remember in 2016 when there were 17 Republicans running for president, and you just see it. Like, I went and saw people talk in person in New Hampshire, which is one of my favorite things to do, living in New England. I always try to melt into the, please don't know I'm here, like try to melt into the background and just watch people. But you get a sense pretty soon of like, people's sense of themselves and their sense of their skills, the sense of their importance, the sense of their charisma, running into the granite wall that is a bunch of New Hampshire voters who really don't care. And it's a good process. It is a healthy process. But I think a lot of what happens when people say like, I don't need this party is just holding me back, people just want me unfettered. Actually, no, people liked that you were able to carry your state for that party and vote for stuff that people broadly associate with the party that you represent. And so if you want to go be a, horse trader about your own value because you want to be the deciding vote on everything in a way that's unpredictable and that makes everybody pay attention to you, then you get to be the star of the Joe Manchin show. But there isn't any broader role for you than that in politics. That's what I think.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think we disagree in a lot of this. What I continue to feel and sense and believe is that there's a group of people that believe in country over party, and want an alternative or alternatives. And it's not that they want, something else. They want none of the above. They just want to be, free agents. They want to be unaffiliated. And this is the argument I had with Andrew Yang. I said the solution to the two parties is not another party run by you. We don't want to be in any party. And I think that is different than, a self-appointed king or queen of the independents. But I think there is an opportunity for someone to speak to those values, however they're defined, however they're branded, right? And that could be Trump, who says it in a bad way, or it could be The Rock. I mean, I keep using that as an example, right? But there are, transformative figures who can bust the structure. A Zelensky, in a different place would be an example. And I think it's a matter not so much of tactics and even process, but of leadership. And like that, the leader who decides to be that one or those 10 or those 50, I think have an opportunity to disrupt this in the next couple of years.
But I think what you're talking about doesn't require transformative change. It just means sort of rebranding what it is to be a swing voter. Right? To say, sure, I'm a voter who doesn't register with either party. I think I should be able to vote in either primary. And so I should advocate for that in terms of how my state allocates primary or sets up primary rules. But I want to vote for the best person. Sometimes it's going to be a Republican. Sometimes it's going to be a Democrat. And it's also the recipe for people, once they're in office, even if they are in one of the two parties, to make cross-party appeals, right? Look at the new governor of Pennsylvania, who ran against an insane person who was running to make Pennsylvania an insane place. And sort of not surprisingly, I think the Democrat won, and he won big. But now, as the new governor of Pennsylvania, as a Democrat, he's spending all of his initial time as a Democrat trying to make common cause with Republicans in a place where there are, technocratic, sane, common ground kind of places to move forward. Like that, to me, doesn't require anything new about thinking about the parties. It just requires people being big-hearted and self-confident about their role, that they don't need to do things that are knee-jerk partisan. They're about independent values in action, right? And having somebody labeled independent doesn't matter that much if you sort of treat country over party as your operating principle.
I think there's a fascinating, and I think maybe incredibly important discussion happening about redefining patriotism, right? And that's where I think some of these leaders are trying to do it. And you and I were talking, and I do have to let you go at some point to do all the amazing things you need to do. But you and I were talking about how you were guest number 8 on this show, and we're 208. So number 1 was Willie Geist. Number 2 was Rob Serra. Number 3 was Ron Perlman. Number 4 was Peter Berg. Number 5 was Sarah Jessica Parker. Number 6 was Ajen Poo. Number 7 was you. Number 8 was Tom Colicchio. Number 9 was Zainab Salbi. And number 10 was Wes Moore.
Mr. Governor.
Who I think is also redefining patriotism. And I'm going to put a marker down. I'm going to say he could be president in 6 years. And I think it could be him against DeSantis. We used to say for a long time, I used to say it was going to be Wes Moore against Eric Greitens one day. Now it could be Wes Moore versus Ron DeSantis. I think this guy's coming. I know him. He's a friend. I support him. But I think it's happening so fast that people don't even see it coming. Yeah. And I think it's been brewing for a long time. It's not, I'm going to give him shit. It didn't like he just all of a sudden appeared, I'm going to be governor. I mean, this is a thing that's been happening that is Wes for a long time. And he's got a magic that I've never seen before. And I just want to ask you, given all the other stuff we're talking about, him, what do you see in him and his potential?
I totally agree with you. I agree with you 1,000%. And now he is in a job where he has to deliver. Right? This is a governing job. And part of what happened in Maryland politics before Wes got into the governor's mansion is that the two-party divide kind of broke there a little bit with Larry Hogan, right? And his, arguably, positive, he was viewed positively in terms of how he performed as governor. He definitely distanced himself from the rest of his party, particularly from Trump. I don't think Hogan himself is a potent challenger to Trump, and I don't think Hogan goes to national office. I mean, we'll see. But that break in blue state Maryland around Hogan, I think, actually creates a lot of room to maneuver for Wes in terms of how Wes, like he's my buddy, for Governor Moore as he is going.
He's on MSNBC a lot in the last 10 years.
I mean, and I've been following his career for more than 10 years, and he has to deliver in a way that works for the people of Maryland. And when crises arise and when scandals arise, he has to handle them in a way that doesn't just preserve his magic, but that shows that he's a good man who can handle things adeptly, and who the country would be well served by him having even bigger things to manage. And biography alone can't get you there. I do think that he's incredibly promising, but he's got to focus not on what happens after the governorship. He needs to focus on being a fracking fantastic governor in a way that earns it and proves it. And he has the space to do that, I think. So we'll see.
I think we will see. And I think it'll be fun to watch. I think there's we started with you talking about positivity. There's an infectious positivity around Wes that just feels good and makes people feel good. And I think everybody really needs that right now. A lot of folks are beaten up and tired and frustrated and looking for hope and change. And it's got a hope and change on, for a next generation that I think is really powerful. I'm going to ask you if you can stick around for 3 or 4 quick questions for our Patreon members who make this happen. But I want to ask you a final question that comes from my wife. Okay, who adores you.
Who it is mutual adoration.
she also, I think, like many people, draws strength from you. And it's been a hard time for everybody in the last couple of years. I think that we don't talk about it enough as Americans. We don't talk about it enough as leaders. It's been really hard for me. It's been hard for my family. It's obviously harder for people in Ukraine and other places, but it's been hard for the world. And my wife asked me to ask you, what's bringing you joy these days?
That's a great question. You know, I took a leap when I made this change in my job, right? Like I had the best job in America, arguably, the best job in media for sure. Editorial freedom, the best staff that has ever worked on any TV show in the history of TV shows. An unchanging hour of prime real estate to do with as I wished in a way that was well supported and well rewarded. And I chose to give that up and do something different. And that, talking about cliff diving earlier in our discussion, that was the off the cliff moment. And I can't say that that was a joyful experience, but I take deep satisfaction from having made a considered decision to make a change and not stayed with the safe thing to do something new. And the thing that I most value is the editorial freedom to choose stories that I want to tell and to tell them the way that I want. And I have retained that while making my life better and getting to spend more time with Susan, which is actually the point of my life. This is the reason that I am on Earth, is to be with Susan Mikula, my partner. And so it's not exactly joy because it took a lot of adrenaline to get there, but it's a deep, real satisfaction. And I feel like it made me grow up a lot. And I'm happy. I'm happy, and I'm trying to stay healthy, and I'm trying to be as good a partner to Susan as I can, and I'm trying to be good at my job.
You are all those things, and I am inspired to be around you and to witness you. And I think there's a selfishness in the country, like the country wanted more of you. Like, don't, it's like when Jon Stewart left, very different. Like, don't leave us. We need you. Help us through this. But I think not only do you seem happier, but I think what you're doing is more important for all of us. Like the work is so much more impactful. The work is so much bigger, and folks don't always see that because they're not in the sauce with you. But I am so already impressed and grateful for the contributions you're making, and even more excited about what's to come. Because I think part of your gift is a vision for what is important and what needs to happen next. And there's a tremendous selflessness about the way you do it. And your contribution is tremendous and just everlasting. And I adore you, and I'm grateful for you. People don't say it enough. Thank you for all you do for this country. I think when patriotism has been fucking mangled in the last couple of years, I know your patriotism, and you are redefining it, and I am grateful for that. So thank you.
Please, can I bottle you and just put you in a locket and just hold you right here? And so that, like, when I'm feeling doubtful, I can just look at that, because you are kinder to me than I deserve. But I love you, man. Thank you. Thank you.
Not at all. Okay, you didn't make a prediction. Who's going to win, Chiefs or Eagles? In my gut, I think the Eagles are going to win. And the reason I think the Eagles are going to win, because I feel like the Eagles are trench warfare, and I feel like the Chiefs are fireworks, right? And so it's like when the Chiefs are doing miraculous things, miracles happen, and any unwinnable game becomes winnable. But the Eagles just systematically mow down possibilities from other teams. I don't know. Is that how you see it? What do you think? I do. We agree 100%. They're like Alabama and Georgia in college. They're a machine. And Mahomes is banged up, and Magic has can't last forever, but process does, and Belichick and others have shown us that. And I hate to say it, the Eagles look dastardly. I mean, and their lines are crushing, and they look like a machine that's just getting hotter, like Alabama and Georgia and so many other college teams we've seen. But
I do feel like, though, saying that they're crushing, though, like I do feel like they also injure lots of players from other teams.
They do.
And
they hit really hard. They block really well. I mean, people who played and coached and watched, it's blocking and tackling. They block exceptionally well. They're tenacious. They work really well together. I mean, it is when a football team is a high functioning machine, it is a machine. It's 11 human beings, 22 on both sides of the ball clicking. And that's what you see. Georgia was a great example this year in the college side. And you saw it coming with Philly. When they look good, they look like that. And I think that's what's coming for Kansas City this week.
It is joyless, though. There is a certain
Yes, it's Philly. It's Philly. Yes, it's very joyless. Yes. Yes.
I lived in Philly for a while, and in Philly, first of all, my first day living in Philly, I was like such a
I mean, it's the Eagles. I don't mean the city of Philly. I mean,
Philly and the Eagles are one. I'm sorry.
I know, but I like Philly. I don't like the Eagles.
I love Philly, but there is a menace in Philly that makes it like it tests you literally the first day I lived in Philadelphia, I rode my bike to my new job. I chained it up with all of the different bike locks that I had right outside the front door of my job. And by lunch, my bike was gone. I didn't even make it. I literally didn't make it to ride my bike home for lunch. Day one. I mean, even the good things about Philly come with a little bit of a kidney punch, which has always been part of the joy and wonder of Philly. It's such a great American city. But they make you, they are not there to entertain you. They are there to destroy you if you are playing their football team.
All right, you got to do sports more. I'm just going to say that to the world. I mean, have you ever been on with the Mannings on Monday Night Football? You need to be. You so need to be, because you talk. You talking football, you talking drinking, you talking anything, but especially when you get cranked up about football, it's fascinating for people, and it's fun.
I just do it with you. It'll be my Rykoff only.
All right, let Spielberg know. Until then. Thank you for all that you do. Thank you for being so generous to me and for visiting on the show. I hope it's not 200 episodes before you come back. All the best to you. And thank you. Stay vigilant.